when blue and red lights lit up my driveway. I thought maybe a fugitive had escaped through my ranch fence. Turns out the emergency was me swinging open my own front gate. Karen, my next-door neighbor with a permanent scowl and 3-inch acrylics, had dialed 911 because, in her words, a suspicious man is trying to break into the property. The suspicious man, of course, was me, the guy who signed the mortgage papers, cut the check for the land, and had his name etched on the mailbox in block letters. The first officer stepped out of his cruiser, hand resting near his holster. Karen came running down her driveway barefoot, waving her arms like she'd spotted a prowler. "That's him. That's the one," she shrieked, pointing straight at me. I almost laughed because the only thing I was armed with was a grocery bag and a stubborn gate latch. I could feel the tension rising. This wasn't going to be a funny misunderstanding if I didn't handle it right. So I set down my bag, raised my hand slightly, and let the absurdity of the situation soak in. "Evening, officers," I said calmly. "Mind if I grab my wallet before she convinces you I'm a cat burglar on my own land?" The officer stiffened, scanning me carefully. Karen kept yelling, her voice climbing higher with each sentence. "He doesn't live here. He's trespassing. I told you this whole time he's been sneaking around. Arrest him before he runs." It would have been comical if it wasn't so serious. One wrong move, and I'd be face down on gravel, explaining myself with a knee in my back. Instead, I took a deep breath, pulled out my leather wallet, and flipped it open to the small badge tucked neatly inside. Not a tin toy, not a novelty trinket, but the official federal kind that makes trained officers blink before they process what they're looking at. The silence that followed was thick. The first officer's posture changed instantly. He straightened up, his hand fell from his holster, and his tone softened. "Sir," he said, nodding respectfully. His partner leaned forward, eyes widening. And then, this part will never stop amusing me, they both gave me a crisp salute right there under the buzzing streetlight. Karen froze, her mouth hanging open like a screen door in the wind. The shift from righteous fury to baffled disbelief was worth every second of the hassle. "Wait, what? Why are you saluting him? He's the criminal," she demanded, jabbing her finger toward me again. The lead officer didn't even look at her. He turned to me and asked in a low, professional tone, "Do you want us to handle this situation, sir?" That was when I realized I had more power in this moment than I planned. My instinct was to laugh it off, but the way Karen's face turned a shade somewhere between beetroot and fire hydrant told me this was bigger than a petty tantrum. She truly believed she could weaponize law enforcement against me. And if she thought today's stunt would scare me off, she had no idea what game she just started. I shook my head lightly, choosing my words with deliberate slowness. "Not tonight. She just confused. But I'd like a record of this call made, if you don't mind." The officer nodded, already jotting notes in his logbook. Karen squawked in protest, shouting about how she was just protecting the neighborhood, how the HOA gave her authority, how I was unstable, and probably carrying weapons inside. Every sentence dug her hole deeper, and every line made the officer's expressions tighten. What Karen didn't know was that I'd been documenting her antics for weeks. The parking notes she left on my windshield, the screaming matches about violating community aesthetics when I installed solar panels, even a bizarre claim that my mailbox was too shiny. It was all neatly saved, time-stamped, and waiting for the right moment. Her dialing 911 on me was the spark I'd been waiting for. When the officers finally dismissed her and drove off, Karen stood in her driveway, glaring at me like I'd stolen her throne. "This isn't over," she hissed. I gave her the calmest smile I could muster. "You're right. It's just beginning." That night, sitting at my kitchen table, I laid out all the documentation I had collected. It wasn't just about a nosy neighbor anymore. Karen's obsession with control, her habit of bending rules to her will, and now her willingness to drag police into a personal feud. It all painted a dangerous picture. She wanted power, and she was reckless enough to manufacture emergencies to get it. Most people would have tried to ignore her, move away, or let the HOA settle things. But I wasn't most people. I had resources, connections, and more patience than Karen could fathom, and I wasn't going to waste any of it. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to a colleague in federal compliance who owed me a favor. The second was to the county clerk's office to request public records on the HOA's incorporation and financial filings. If Karen thought dialing 911 would scare me, she just handed me every excuse I needed to turn the spotlight on her entire operation. By lunchtime, I already had the first twist in my hand. The HOA board hadn't submitted their annual financial disclosure in 3 years. That, to anyone who knew the system, was not just a clerical oversight. It was the kind of negligence that could unravel an entire organization. I leaned back in my chair, sipping coffee, staring out the window at Karen furiously watering her already overwatered lawn. She had no idea that the same gate she called the cops over last night was about to swing wide open on something much bigger, and I was more than ready to step through. The next time Karen came at me, she didn't come with a phone in her hand. She came with a clipboard. That alone should tell you how bad it was about to get. A clipboard in Karen's hands is like a rattlesnake's rattle. You hear it before the strike, and by then it's too late. She marched straight onto my driveway while I was tightening a hinge on the same gate she tried to have me arrested over. "Violation notice," she snapped, thrusting the papers in my direction like she was serving a warrant. "Your gate doesn't conform to neighborhood standards. It swings inward, not outward." Section 9, subparagraph C. I glanced at the clipboard. Neat rows of text. A printout clearly made on her home office inkjet. The HOA seal at the top looked suspiciously like it had been lifted from a Google image search and pixel stretched into authority. She had even highlighted the rule in neon pink. I couldn't help but smile. "Funny thing," I said, pulling a folded stack of my own paperwork from my pocket. "I was just reading Section 9, subparagraph C last night. You should have too. It says recommended, not required." Her nostrils flared. "It's mandatory if I say it's mandatory. And as head of compliance, I say it's mandatory." That was her tell. She wanted to control, not to protect the neighborhood, not to preserve order. Control. She needed people to bend to her or she couldn't function. But this wasn't just about a gate anymore. My research from the clerk's office had confirmed my hunch. Karen wasn't just a power-hungry busybody. She was presiding over an HOA that was one filing error away from collapse. I leaned against the gate post, folding her notice neatly in half, then half again, until it was the size of a matchbox. I tucked it into my shirt pocket and looked her in the eye. "I'll hang on to this. You never know when these things might come in handy." Her jaw twitched. She wasn't used to someone treating her threats like scraps of paper. She stormed off, heels clicking angrily against the concrete, muttering about fines and liens. By sunset, I received the official letter. Karen had mailed it certified, just to make sure her authority weighed more. The envelope had her scrawled signature in all caps: President, Homeowners Association. I almost wanted to frame it. That evening, I got a call back from my colleague in federal compliance. He had pulled the HOA's filings. "You were right," he said. "Their books are a mess. No financial disclosures in 3 years. Technically, their nonprofit status is suspended, which means they're not legally operating." That sentence hit me like a shot of bourbon. The HOA wasn't just sloppy. They didn't legally exist in the way Karen kept insisting. Every fine, every letter, every mandatory fee they had issued was, in effect, unenforceable. It was like Karen had built a castle out of paper, then crowned herself queen. I hung up the phone, staring at the stack of notices she'd sent me over the last 6 months. Each one suddenly transformed from threat to evidence. I decided to let Karen bury herself a little deeper before showing my hand. The next morning, Karen escalated again. She stood in my driveway with 2 other board members, her enforcers. One was a retired insurance adjuster with a permanent frown. The other was a nervous-looking woman who clutched a pen like it was a sword. "You are in violation," Karen declared. "We are issuing you a fine of $500. "For what this time?" I asked casually, leaning on the fence. "For operating an unregistered vehicle," she said, pointing at my truck. "You don't have neighborhood-approved decals." I raised an eyebrow. "Neighborhood-approved decals?" "Section 12, she barked. I pulled out my phone, scrolled, and then read aloud. Section 12. Residents may apply for decals to assist with parking privileges. May, not must. The nervous board member shifted uncomfortably, glancing at her own copy. Karen shot her a glare that could have boiled water. "Pay the fine," Karen said, voice clipped. "Or what?" I asked. "Or we place a lien on your property." That was the moment I decided to end the charade. I walked to my truck, reached into the glove box, and pulled out a manila envelope. Inside were the documents from the county clerk. Proof the HOA was suspended, proof Karen had no legal standing, proof every threat she'd issued was smoke and mirrors. I held the envelope casually, not opening it yet. "Karen, let me ask you something. Do you know what happens when a board issues fines without legal authority? Or when they threaten liens they can't enforce?" She blinked, thrown off balance for the first time. "We have full authority," she stammered. I stepped closer, dropping my voice just enough to make her lean in. "Not according to the state. Your charter lapsed 3 years ago. You're running a ghost HOA. Everything you've done is void. Every fine, every notice, every threat, it's all hot air. And I've got the paperwork to prove it." The retired insurance adjuster's face drained of color. The nervous woman gasped softly. Karen, for once, had no words. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again like a fish out of water. I didn't hand her the papers. Not yet. Instead, I tucked the envelope back into my truck and smiled. "Don't worry. I'm patient. Let's see how deep you want to dig before we bring in the county." They left without another word. That night, I sat on my porch sipping coffee, watching the street. The neighborhood was quiet, but I could feel the shift. Karen wasn't going to let this go. People like her never retreat. They doubled down. She'd find another angle, another way to try to assert control. But this time, I wasn't just ready. I was 3 steps ahead. Sure enough, the twist came the next day. Karen wasn't on my driveway this time. She was in my backyard. I caught her by sheer accident when I went out to water the plants and found her pacing along my fence line with a flashlight in broad daylight, peering into my property like a detective. "What are you doing?" I asked. She jumped, nearly dropping her clipboard. "Inspecting," she said stiffly. "I've received reports of unauthorized structures on your property." "From who? The squirrels?" I asked, keeping my voice level but laced with sarcasm. Her cheeks flushed. "This is serious. You cannot build sheds, playhouses, or other structures without HOA approval." I pointed at the structure she was so concerned about. A doghouse. A simple wooden doghouse for my retriever, half-painted and definitely not big enough to violate any zoning law. "You mean that?" I said. "It's unauthorized," she snapped. That was when I realized just how far she was willing to go. She wasn't going to stop at gates, decals, or vehicles. She was going to invent infractions out of thin air, if that's what it took. Her need for control wasn't just obsession, it was desperation. But she had made a mistake stepping onto my property uninvited. A mistake that, unlike her fake fines, carried real consequences. "Karen," I said slowly, "you just trespassed. That's an actual violation of law. And unlike your rulebook, this one sticks." Her eyes flickered, but she tried to hold her ground. I was within my rights. I pulled out my phone. "Let's ask the sheriff." For the first time since this feud started, I saw fear in her eyes. She turned, muttered something under her breath, and stormed off without another word. The first clue that Karen was about to escalate came not from her, but from my mailbox. I found a glossy flyer stuffed inside, printed on thick cardstock and covered in all-caps headlines. "Community meeting. Emergency vote to remove troublemaker." The troublemaker, of course, was me. My name was in bold red letters underneath, like I was a wanted criminal. There was even a grainy photo of me adjusting my truck mirror, zoomed in from God knows where, as if I were casing the neighborhood for burglary. I stood in my driveway, flipping the flyer back and forth, trying not to laugh. She hadn't even attempted subtlety. She'd turned the HOA into a propaganda machine and declared me public enemy number 1. That night, as I watered the lawn, my neighbor Ron wandered over. Ron was the kind of man who wore socks with sandals and drank beer out a mug labeled "World's Okayest Golfer." He leaned on the fence, holding up the same flyer. "You see the circus?" he asked. "Front row seat," I said. He chuckled. "She came door to door handing these out. Told us you were trying to dismantle the HOA and seize control of the neighborhood." "Seize control?" I raised an eyebrow. Ron grinned. Yeah, like you're some Bond villain. Honestly, half the street thinks she's lost her mind, but a few people are eating it up. You gonna go to that meeting? Oh, I'll be there, I said. Wouldn't miss it for the world. The meeting took place in the community hall 2 nights later. Karen had set the room like a courtroom drama. Folding chairs lined up in rows. A long table up front with a faux gavel she must have ordered online, and a projector screen that flickered with her slideshow. She'd gone all in, even wearing a blazer that made her look like she was running for city council. Neighbors filled the room, whispering among themselves. I spotted some sympathetic glances, a few hostile ones, and plenty of curious stares. Ron sat near the back with his beer mug in hand, empty, thank God, but he winked at me as if to say, enjoy the show. Karen banged the gavel against the table. Order, she cried, like we were in the Supreme Court. The room fell silent. We are here tonight, she began, to address a threat to our community. A threat who has repeatedly violated our rules, ignored our authority, and endangered the harmony of our neighborhood. She clicked her projector remote. My face appeared on the screen in blurry resolution. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms, letting her play her hand. Karen marched through a parade of evidence. My gate, my truck decals, my unauthorized structure, the doghouse. Each accusation drew a mixture of murmurs, some scoffs, some nervous agreement. She built her case with the zeal of a prosecutor. Finally, she pointed straight at me. This man refuses to respect our standards. He flaunts the rules. And worst of all, he intimidates board members with threats of legal action. I got a reaction. The word intimidates made a few heads snap toward me. That was her game. Paint me as dangerous, unhinged, a menace. If she couldn't scare me directly, she tried to turn the neighborhood against me. When she was done, she set down the remote with a flourish. The board will now hear motions to censure and fine this individual. The silence that followed was delicious. I stood slowly, letting the chair scrape just loud enough to punctuate the moment. I walked to the front with deliberate calm, holding nothing but the manila envelope I'd been saving. Thank you, Karen, I said, my tone light, almost cheerful. Quite the performance. But before anyone here decides whether I'm a threat, maybe they should know who's really breaking the law. I opened the envelope and pulled out the documents. This is a letter from the county clerk. It shows that this HOA's nonprofit charter was suspended 3 years ago for failing to file required disclosures, meaning this board has no legal authority to issue fines, place liens, or collect dues. Gasps rippled through the room. Karen's face went pale, then flushed crimson. I laid the paperwork on the table in front of her. Every letter you've sent, every fine you've threatened, every scare tactic, it's all void. And you've been presenting yourself as president of an organization that, on paper, doesn't even exist. The retired insurance adjuster shifted uncomfortably. The nervous board member actually raised her hand like she was in grade school. Is that true? She asked weakly. Karen slammed her palm on the table. Lies. He forged that. I laughed softly. Go ahead. Call the clerk's office tomorrow. Ask them yourself. You'll hear the same thing I did. The room erupted in murmurs. Some neighbors were grinning. Others looked stunned. A few shot Karen sharp looks that could have cut glass. She scrambled to recover. This is a technicality. It doesn't matter. We're still in charge until we renew our status. No, I said evenly. It does matter. Because while you're busy playing judge, jury, and executioner, you've been collecting dues illegally, which, legally speaking, looks a lot like fraud. That word landed like a thunderclap. Fraud. You could feel the mood shift. Even the people who had been nodding along with Karen were suddenly sitting straighter, their eyes darting toward the exits as if they didn't want to be associated with her anymore. Ron let out a low whistle from the back. Guess that meeting backfired. Huh? Karen's composure cracked. She fumbled with the gavel, banging it clumsily. This meeting is adjourned, she shrieked. But it was too late. Neighbors were already whispering to each other, some approaching me, asking for copies of the documents. Karen stormed out, her heels clacking like gunshots against the tile. The fallout was immediate. By the next morning, 3 neighbors knocked on my door asking for advice. They want to know if they could stop paying dues. One even asked if they could sue to get their money back. That was when I realized I had gone from target to leader overnight. Karen's attempt to exile me had instead crowned me the unofficial spokesman for everyone tired of her reign. But Karen wasn't finished. People like her never surrender. They escalate. Sure enough, 2 days later, a certified letter arrived. Not from her this time, from a law firm. The letter accused me of defamation of character and interference with HOA operations. They demanded I cease making false claims and threaten a lawsuit if I continued. I read it twice, then set on the counter. I wasn't rattled. If anything, I was impressed. Karen had convinced someone to draft this mess on her behalf, probably paid for out of the very dues she'd been collecting illegally. Instead of panicking, I called my compliance colleague again. He laughed so hard I had to hold the phone away. Defamation? With public records on your side? She doesn't have a leg to stand on. Still, I knew the stakes were higher now. Karen wasn't playing with flyers and fake fines anymore. She was dragging me into real legal territory. I decided it was time to use my badge again, not to scare her, but to protect myself. I made a quiet call to a federal contact and explained the situation. They didn't laugh. They listened carefully, asked for the documents, and told me to keep everything preserved. The subpoena came faster than I expected. 3 weeks after Karen's lawyer threatened me with defamation, a sheriff's deputy knocked on her door. I was trimming a hedge when it happened, which meant I had a front row seat to the fireworks. Karen answered in her usual battle armor, pressed slacks, stiff blouse, hair sprayed into submission. The deputy handed her a thick envelope. She glanced at it, then at him, then back at the envelope like it was radioactive. "What's this supposed to be?" she snapped. "Notice to produce documents," he replied flatly. "You're required to provide records of the HOA's financial activities for the last 5 years. Her voice cracked. "That's ridiculous. We don't have to answer to anyone but our members." The deputy gave her a long look. "Ma'am, it's a federal request." "You do." Then he tipped his hat, turned, and left her standing in the doorway, clutching the envelope like it might bite. I pretended to keep trimming the hedge, but inside, I felt a rush. She'd finally attracted the attention she deserved. What began with a fake violation notice had spiraled into a full-scale investigation. And now, every check she'd cashed, every fine she'd invented, every dime she'd funneled into whatever personal project she dreamed up, it was all going to be dragged into daylight. That night, I caught her outside pacing her yard. She was on the phone, voice shrill enough to carry across the street. "No, listen, you don't understand. If they see the books, it'll ruin everything. Just fix it. Make it disappear." Whoever was on the other end wasn't giving her the answer she wanted because she threw the phone onto the grass and stomped back inside. The next morning, things got even stranger. A black SUV rolled up to her house, the kind of tinted window vehicle that usually screams government agency or private investigator. 2 men in plain suits walked up, knocked, and were let in. They stayed for an hour. When they left, Karen followed them out, flustered, holding another stack of papers. Neighbors noticed. You could see curtains twitching up and down the street. Rumors spread like wildfire. Ron, never one to let gossip pass him by, showed up at my porch with a beer mug. "You see the suits?" he asked. "Hard to miss," I said. He smirked. "Half the block thinks she's laundering money. Other half thinks she's running some pyramid scheme. Me? I think she just doesn't know how to balance a checkbook." I laughed, but he wasn't entirely wrong. Karen's power didn't come from brilliance. It came from intimidation. She'd barked, people had jumped, and she'd built her little empire on that. But when intimidation doesn't work on the right people, the cracks show fast. Sure enough, the cracks widened. 2 board members resigned the following week. First, the nervous woman, who left a note in everyone's mailbox apologizing for any stress caused and claiming she'd been misled. Then a retired insurance adjuster, who vanished without explanation. That left Karen standing alone on her rickety soapbox, yelling louder than ever to make up for the silence around her. She doubled down, of course. Flyers reappeared, this time accusing me of conspiring with federal agents to dissolve the community. She staged another meeting, which barely 5 people attended. One neighbor filmed part of it on their phone, and uploaded it to Facebook. The clip of Karen waving her gavel, shouting about shadow governments, got more laughs than views. But the real twist landed on a Tuesday afternoon. I was coming back from work when two officers, different from the ones who saluted me, pulled up to my house. Not hostile, not tense, just official. "Sir, are you aware of any unusual financial requests made by the HOA?" one asked. "Define unusual," I said carefully. "Special assessments, unexplained fee increases, things of that nature." I thought of the $300 beautification fee Karen tried to collect last spring, supposedly to plant flowers that never appeared. The $200 emergency levy after someone's trash cans blew over. The endless parade of petty fines that vanished into her personal coffers. "Yeah," I said finally. "I'm aware." They nodded, handed me a card, and told me to call if I remembered specifics. As they left, I realized what this meant. The investigation wasn't just a file on someone's desk anymore. They were gathering statements, building a case. Karen must have realized it too, because her next move was straight desperation. At 2 a.m, headlights flashed through my bedroom window. I got up, looked outside, and there she was in my driveway, stuffing envelopes under my windshield wipers. I slipped on boots, walked out, and cleared my throat. She froze mid-crouch like a raccoon caught in the trash. "What are you doing?" I asked. She straightened up fast, clutching her clipboard like a shield. "Serving notice. You're in violation again." "In violation of what?" "Breathing air past curfew." Her voice shook, but she tried to hold her ground. "You don't understand. If I lose this neighborhood, I lose everything. You think you're clever, hiding behind your badge, but I built this place. People respect me." Her words hung in the night air. That was the raw truth of it. It wasn't about gates or doghouses or decals. It was about her identity. Without the HOA throne, Karen was just another neighbor with a patchy lawn and too much time on her hands. She wasn't ready to let that go. I took the envelope from her hand, opened it, and skimmed. It was a handwritten fine demanding I pay $1,000 for slander against the board. The paper was shaky, smeared, almost desperate. I folded it, slid it into my pocket, and said quietly, "Karen, go home." She stared at me for a long moment, then stomped off, muttering curses. The next morning, I called the number on the investigator's card and handed over the envelope. That turned out to be the final straw. A week later, Karen's house was swarmed, first by county officials, then by federal agents. Trucks came, boxes left. Neighbors stood on sidewalks watching as years of binders, files, and hard drives were carried out. Someone whispered embezzlement. Someone else said tax fraud. Nobody had the full picture, but everyone understood the meaning. Karen's reign was finished. She tried to fight it, of course. She stood on her lawn shouting about witch hunts, about conspiracies, about how I had engineered the whole thing. But her voice sounded smaller now, drowned out by the sound of agents slamming doors on SUVs and driving away with her paperwork. By evening, she was gone. Packed up, car loaded, blinds drawn. No goodbye, no meeting, no gavel bangs. Just absence. The neighborhood felt different overnight. Lighter, quieter, freer. People smiled more. Kids played without their parents worrying about fines. Someone even built a treehouse without asking permission. Ron stopped by again with his mug. "You realize you killed the HOA, right?" he said with a grin. "I didn't kill it," I said. "Karen did. I just handed her the shovel." But here's the thing. As satisfying as it was to watch her collapse, I knew better than to think it was over. People like Karen don't just disappear. They resurface, reinvent, and come back nastier. And sure enough, the rumor mill churned. One neighbor swore they saw her at the courthouse filing something. Another claimed she'd been spotted talking to lawyers downtown. Then a week later, an anonymous letter arrived in my mailbox. No return address, no name, just one sentence scrawled in blocky handwriting. The anonymous letter should have rattled me. Neighbors whispered. Ron kept giving me looks like I ought to pack up and move, but I didn't. Fear was what Karen fed on. If I flinched, she won. And I wasn't about to hand her that satisfaction. Still, I wasn't naive. Karen had gone from fake notices to legal threats, to full-blown federal subpoenas. She wasn't playing the neighborhood tyrant anymore. She was cornered. A cornered animal is dangerous, and Karen was no exception. The first strike came subtly. My internet went down. Not a storm, not a technical hiccup, sabotage. The box out by the curb had been tampered with, the lock pried open. The service tech who came to fix it shook his head. Someone had tools, knew what they were doing. 2 days later, my mailbox was ripped out of the ground. Not knocked over, ripped out. The bolts bent, the post snapped clean in half. The same night, eggs hit my windows. Childish vandalism, yes, but I knew whose fingerprints were all over it. Karen was trying to make life unlivable, hoping I'd retreat. Instead, I documented everything. Photos, timestamps, service reports. Every act of petty sabotage became another nail in her coffin. Then came the escalation. It was a Saturday afternoon, warm, the kind of day that should have been for barbecues and mowing lawns. I heard shouting out front. By the time I stepped outside, Karen was standing in the middle of the street, red-faced, waving a stack of papers. "This man is a fraud," she screamed, her voice echoing down the block. Neighbors came to their windows, some stepped onto porches. She brandished the papers like proof of my crimes. "He's impersonating a federal officer," she yelled. "That badge is fake. He tricked all of you." That got everyone's attention. Impersonating an officer is serious. I could see suspicion flicker in a few eyes. Karen had found her angle. If she couldn't break me through fines or sabotage, she tried to strip me of the one thing that had shielded me before, my badge. I walked calmly into the street. "Karen, you're accusing me of a federal crime. Do you have evidence?" She shook the papers wildly. "Right here. Proof. He's nothing but a liar." I held out my hand. "Then show me." For a moment, I thought she might actually do it. But when I stepped closer, she pulled the papers back like a magician hiding a trick. "I don't need to show you. I'll show the police." "Perfect," I said. "Let's call them right now." The crowd murmured. Some smirked. Ron was grinning ear to ear, clearly enjoying the spectacle. Karen faltered, but before she could retreat, flashing lights appeared down the block. A squad car rolled up. Someone must have already called. The officer stepped out, the same one who had saluted me weeks earlier. Karen rushed him like reinforcements had finally arrived. "Arrest him," she cried. "He's impersonating a federal officer." The officer's face barely moved. He looked at me, then at her. "Ma'am, do you have any proof?" "Yes. These documents." She shoved the papers into his chest. He glanced at them. Then he looked up at her with something between amusement and pity. "These are Google printouts." "What?" she shrieked. "Ma'am," he said, his tone flat now, "this isn't evidence. It's articles you copied off the internet about unrelated cases. None of this has your neighbor's name on it." The neighbors burst into laughter. Karen's face twisted with rage, but the officer didn't stop there. He turned to me. "Sir, would you like to present identification again, for the record?" I pulled out my wallet, flipped it open. The badge gleamed under the sun. The officer studied it, nodded respectfully, then turned back to Karen. "Everything checks out," he said. Her scream was guttural, the kind that comes when someone realizes their last bullet misfired. "You're all in on it," she wailed. "This whole neighborhood is blind." The officer's tone hardened. "Ma'am, you've been warned before. False reports waste resources. Keep this up, and you'll be the one in cuffs." He handed her back her stack of nonsense papers and walked away. Karen stood frozen in the street, shaking as neighbors trickled back inside, laughing under their breath. I thought that might be the end, but Karen wasn't built to accept defeat gracefully. The final showdown came a week later at 3 in the morning. I woke to the sound of metal grinding. I slipped on boots, stepped outside, and there she was at my gate again, this time with bolt cutters in her hands. She didn't see me right away. She was sweating, muttering to herself, sawing at the lock. "Karen," I said quietly. She spun around, eyes wild. "You don't deserve this," she spat. "You don't deserve to live here, to run things, to humiliate me. I built this neighborhood. I made the rules. Without me, it's chaos." Her voice cracked, tears glinting in her eyes. For a split second, I saw the desperation under the entitlement. This wasn't about gates or fines. It was about her losing her identity. She needed to be in charge because without control, she had nothing. Put the cutters down, I said evenly. This isn't the way. But she raised them higher, like she might actually swing. That's when headlights cut across the street. Another cruiser. The officer from before stepped out, hand on his holster. "Ma'am," he barked, "drop the tool." She froze. Her hand shook. Then the cutters clattered to the pavement. The officer cuffed her without another word. She didn't resist. She just sagged, defeated, muttering over and over, "I built this place. I built this place." Neighbors peeked through blinds as Karen was led to the cruiser. Some shook their heads. Some looked relieved. Ron raised his mug in a silent toast as the car drove away. I stood there by my gate, the same gate that started it all, and exhaled. In the days that followed, news spread quickly. Karen had been charged with criminal trespass, vandalism, and obstruction. The investigation into the HOA's finances deepened, with whispers of embezzlement and tax fraud. The board dissolved formally, leaving the neighborhood free for the first time in years. People started stopping me on the street, thanking me, not for fighting Karen, but for standing firm when everyone else had been too afraid. Ron summed it up best one evening, beer mug in hand, as usual. "You didn't just beat her," he said. "You showed her that fear only works until someone laughs in its face." I smiled, watching the sunset glow across the street, the air lighter, freer. Karen had tried everything. 911 calls, fake fines, smear campaigns, sabotage, even bolt cutters in the dead of night. But in the end, it wasn't my badge that broke her. It was the truth. And the truth, once out, doesn't go back in the box. The neighborhood was mine again, not because I owned it, not because I controlled it, but because I refused to be controlled. And if Karen ever came back, I knew one thing for certain. She'd never catch me off guard again.